What if Jesus had never been born? What if that night in Bethlehem had been just another cold and silent night, without angels, without stars, without anything that could change the destiny of humanity? Imagine the world waking up on December 25th as if it were an absolutely ordinary Tuesday, without presents under decorated trees, without colorful lights in the streets, without family dinners, without that collective feeling that something bigger is happening around us at this time of year. Because in this devastating alternative scenario, my friend, there is no Christmas. And when you remove Christmas from human history, you're not just removing a date marked on the calendar, you're crumbling entire civilizations like dominoes falling one after another in a brutal and irreversible sequence. Welcome to another episode of History Would Be Different If, the channel where we take the decisive moments that defined absolutely everything in human history and ask with all seriousness, what if that crucial moment had simply failed? What if things had taken a completely different turn? Today we're going to explore together what would happen if the most important night in human history simply hadn't happened the way we know it. And I'm going to give you a major spoiler before we begin. The end result isn't just sad or melancholic, it's absolutely chaotic, disturbing, and transforms the world into a reality you'd barely recognize if you woke up in it tomorrow. Let's start with the most obvious aspect, but one that practically no one stops to think about with the necessary depth. Without Jesus being born in that manger in Bethlehem, Christianity simply wouldn't exist as an organized and influential religion. It seems like too simple a conclusion when you hear it for the first time, but wait, because the implications of this are much deeper and more comprehensive than your mind can initially process. This means that approximately 2 billion people who identify as Christian today simply wouldn't exist in their current form. Their millennia-old traditions, their fundamental values, their churches spread across all continents, their music that touches our hearts, their works of art that define beauty. Absolutely all of this would be completely vaporized from the timeline as if it had never existed. The medieval Europe we know from history books becomes completely different and unrecognizable because the entity that truly unified that fragmented and tribal continent after the devastating fall of the Roman Empire was precisely the Catholic Church, which obviously cannot exist without Christ as its central figure. So try to mentally visualize Europe as a gigantic jigsaw puzzle that simply never managed to come together, with barbarian tribes eternally fighting amongst themselves without finding a common cultural axis to connect them, without patient monasteries copying ancient manuscripts page by page, preserving the knowledge of antiquity, without medieval universities organically springing up around imposing cathedrals that sought to reach the sky. The very fundamental idea of the West as a cultural and civilizational category that we know today simply vanishes into thin air and ceases to make any sense. But you're probably thinking right now, okay, without Christianity the world would be different, but life would go on somehow, people would find other paths, right? Hold on, young one, put that optimistic excitement to rest, because things get exponentially stranger and more disturbing when you start pulling the threads of this alternate reality. Without the historical birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, the mighty Roman Empire has no reason whatsoever, no plausible motive to change its centuries-long pagan trajectory. Emperor Constantine never has his famous conversion to Christianity, never legalizes this new religion through the Edict of Milan, never strategically transfers the imperial capital to Constantinople with the grandiose ambition of creating a lasting Christian empire that would survive the centuries. Rome simply remains pagan until its last days, faithfully worshipping Jupiter at the top of its pantheon, revering Mars as the god of war, maintaining an entire pantheon of capricious gods who demanded constant animal sacrifices and public festivals generously fueled by cheap wine and blood spilled in rituals. And when Rome finally crumbles and definitively falls into the chaotic 5th century under the weight of the barbarian invasions, there is absolutely no Christian institutional structure strong enough to hold together the shattered shards of classical civilization and attempt to reassemble them. Europe plunges into a cultural darkness even deeper and more desperate than the Middle Ages we know, because the dedicated monasteries that carefully preserved classical knowledge during centuries of darkness simply never existed in this timeline. The monastic libraries that zealously guarded the texts of Aristotle, the complete works of Plato, the revolutionary Greek medical treatises are lost forever in the ashes of history, and the cultural renaissance that transformed Europe never happens because there is no preserved ancient material to be rediscovered, and the philosophical enlightenment that changed human thought becomes impossible without these foundations. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss this disturbing journey through alternate history, because there are still many more unimaginable consequences waiting. And there's an additional layer that most people simply ignore when thinking about this scenario. Without Christianity profoundly shaping Western culture for 2 millennia, the very concept of time that we naturally use every day would be radically different from what we know. The calendar that methodically divides all of human history into before Christ and after Christ would obviously never have been created by medieval monks, so we would probably all be pagans counting the years from the mythical founding of Rome as the Romans did, or following various disconnected lunar calendars from different cultures that were never unified under a common system. December 25th would only be recognized as the Roman winter solstice, marking a pagan festival called Saturnalia, where people exchanged gifts out of social obligation, overate, and drank wine until they literally collapsed unconscious, which, let's be honest, is basically what many people do today during the holiday season, but without the nativity scene laden with symbolism, without the profound narrative behind it, without that thick layer of transcendent meaning that transforms pure materialistic consumption into a genuine celebration of something much greater than ourselves. Think about it seriously for a moment. Without the powerful narrative of the humble boy born in an improvised manger, presented to the world as the Son of God himself, who came to save all of humanity from its sins and suffering, where exactly would Western society find its fundamental moral values that guide billions of daily decisions? The revolutionary and radical idea of Christianity that absolutely all human beings are equal before God, regardless of whether they are rich or poor, powerful masters or chained slaves. This was completely revolutionary and transformative in the ancient Greco-Roman world, where rigid hierarchy was considered the natural and divine order of things, immutable and eternal. Without this explosive ideological seed being planted in the heart of Western civilization, the abolition of slavery would probably take centuries and centuries more to happen, perhaps never exactly in the way we know it today from books, because who will have the courage and moral basis to convincingly argue that slaves possess an immortal soul and inherent and inalienable dignity if there is no dominant religion relentlessly hammering this message home? The historic civil rights movements that transformed societies, the modern idea of universal human dignity applicable to any person, absolutely all of this has deep philosophical and theological roots in Christian doctrine developed over centuries. And without Jesus being born that night in Bethlehem, these civilizational roots simply do not exist buried in the cultural soil. Now prepare your heart for the macabre cherry on top of this dystopia. Islam doesn't exist in this alternative world we're mentally constructing. That's right, because the Prophet Muhammad, who was born approximately 6 centuries after Jesus Christ in Arabia, explicitly recognized Jesus as an extremely important prophet within the lineage of divine revelation, and all of Islamic theology was historically built in complex dialogue and also in fierce dispute with Christianity and Judaism, which already dominated the Middle East. Without Christianity widely spread throughout that region through tireless missionaries, without the Byzantine theological controversies about the exact nature of Christ that were literally boiling in 7th century Arabia, creating factions and debates, Muhammad simply doesn't have the necessary religious and intellectual context to develop and then preach a new revolutionary monotheistic faith that managed to unify the constantly warring Arab tribes under a single banner. So you also need to take out of the historical equation approximately 1.8 billion Muslims scattered across the planet. Their architecturally stunning mosques, their mesmerizing geometric art, their advanced science that gave us algebra and algorithms, their monumental contributions to medieval medicine and astronomy that Europe had forgotten, the golden medieval Islamic world that carefully preserved and then creatively expanded classical Greek knowledge while Christian Europe was mired in obscurantism, simply never happens, and humanity loses entire centuries of scientific and cultural progress. Do you realize how we are literally dismantling human civilization piece by piece, revealing how everything is interconnected in ways we never imagined. But hold on tight, because there's something even more disturbing and philosophical waiting. Without the revolutionary Christian doctrine of individual free will and the unique personal soul, Western philosophy, which shaped how we think, takes a completely different and probably much more deterministic turn. St. Augustine, the thinker who practically invented the modern psychological concept of self as a complex entity with a rich and contradictory inner world, never wrote his revolutionary autobiographical confessions because he never dramatically converted to Christianity, which simply doesn't exist. The transformative idea that each individual person possesses a unique and precious eternal soul in the eyes of God, that their individual moral choices have cosmic weight and consequences, that you are personally responsible for your own moral and spiritual destiny. All this either takes millennia longer to slowly emerge from human philosophy or emerges in a completely different way through other cultural traditions. The very fundamental notion of individual as we know and value it today, with inalienable natural rights and intrinsic dignity, independent of social utility, may be much weaker or practically non-existent, and we live in an alternative world where the tribal or national collective always brutally crushes the individual without remorse, where absolute social conformity is the unquestionable norm, where being genuinely different is not celebrated as diversity, but eliminated as a threat to order. Leave a like now so I know you're following this dizzying descent into the historical abyss, because the most impactful twists are yet to come. Now we're going to enter territory that literally no one considers when superficially imagining a world without Jesus. Western art simply crumbles like a sandcastle, and with it, entire centuries of sublime human creation instantly evaporate from reality as if they had never been painted or sculpted. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, with that monumental ceiling that leaves millions of visitors completely speechless every year, would never be painted because there is no Vatican commissioning grandiose works. There is no biblical story from Genesis to be depicted in colorful frescoes. There is no Christian concept of divine beauty that desperately needs to be captured and immortalized in pigment on plaster. The absolute masterpieces of the Italian Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Caravaggio, with their dramatic contrasts of light and shadow, either do not exist at all or are completely different thematically and aesthetically, because the main generous patron financing these works was precisely the immensely wealthy Catholic Church, spending astronomical fortunes glorifying God through the artistic representation of ultimate beauty. And when we talk about classical music, the loss is even more devastating. Forget completely Johann Sebastian Bach. Forget Handel and his chilling Messiah. Forget Mozart writing his sublime masses that uplift the spirit. The Messiah with that Hallelujah chorus that sends shivers down the spine of even a staunch atheist would never be composed, because there is no Messiah being celebrated and awaited. The European Gothic cathedrals, with their architecturally perfect acoustics, developed specifically for choral singing, simply do not exist, because there are no dedicated monks singing daily, no elaborate liturgy requiring specific spaces, no practical or spiritual need to build these absurdly ambitious vertical spaces that defy gravity, literally trying to touch the sky with stone towers. But the philosophical whole is much, much deeper than art and architecture. Without Jesus being born as the promised Christ, the very Western idea of personal redemption disappears completely from the human cultural narrative, and this absolutely changes everything about how we tell stories and find meaning. How many stories do you avidly consume today in films, books, and series that fundamentally revolve around someone who makes a grave mistake, falls into the abyss, gets completely lost, but eventually finds a tortuous path back to the light? The classic arc of the imperfect hero who heroically sacrifices himself for others in the climax. The complex villain who dramatically redeems himself in the final act by saving those he previously tried to destroy. The comforting concept that no one is irretrievably lost forever, no matter what they have done. This has deep and undeniable cultural roots in the story of the Son of God, who voluntarily dies on the cross and then triumphantly rises again, offering salvation to all. Without this archetypal narrative shaping the Western collective unconscious for literally 2,000 years of storytelling, human narratives would likely be far more fatalistic and hopeless, much closer to classical Greek tragedies, where noble heroes bravely fight against relentless fate, but inevitably always lose everything in the end. Modern Hollywood, without the profoundly Christian narrative structure of fall and redemption embedded in virtually every blockbuster, would be utterly unrecognizable and honestly far more depressing and nihilistic. And now comes a historical plot twist that will literally fry your brain if you really stop to think about it. Without Christianity spreading and eventually dominating, modern experimental science probably wouldn't have taken off and revolutionized the world as we know it throughout history. Wait, how does that make any sense? An absolutely brutal historical plot twist that contradicts what many people assume. It was precisely the medieval Christian universities that methodically created the framework for investigating nature systematically and rigorously, because Christian theology, developed by thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, philosophically defended that God intentionally created an ordered, rational, and comprehensible universe through reason. Meticulously studying nature was considered a legitimate way to study the mind of the Creator expressed in His creation. Galileo Galilei, Nicholas Copernicus, Isaac Newton, absolutely all of them were devout and pious Christians who saw experimental science as a sublime way to glorify the Creator through the understanding of His natural laws. Without this solid philosophical foundation justifying natural investigation, science may very well never manage to move beyond the primitive stage of abstract Greek philosophical speculation and superstitious medieval mystical alchemy. And the scientific revolution that completely transformed humanity may simply not happen when it should, and the devastating domino effect brutally crosses the Atlantic. The Americas were probably never colonized and exploited exactly as they were by Europeans, because what genuinely motivated powers like Spain and Portugal was not just glittering gold and imperial glory, but also the explicit religious mission of converting the pagan peoples of the newly discovered New World to saving Christianity. The three symbolic flags of conquest were traditionally God, gold, and glory, in that exact order of declared importance. Without the evangelizing mission providing moral justification, without dedicated Jesuits establishing elaborate missions throughout the continent, the colonization of the Americas either simply did not happen with the same intensity or happened in an even more brutal and purely extractive way, without any moral veneer attempting to civilize or convert, only to exploit resources to exhaustion. And there is a personal issue that cuts emotionally deeper. Without Jesus being born in that makeshift manger, Joseph and Mary are just an anonymous and poor couple who live, grow old, and die without leaving any mark on history. Mary never becomes the most portrayed and venerated female figure in the entire history of Western art, never becomes a powerful symbol of divine motherhood and redemptive suffering for literally millions of women who have looked to her throughout the centuries as an inspiring role model, a source of comfort in difficult times, and a symbol of maternal strength. It all disappears like smoke in the wind. Share this video now with someone who urgently needs to understand how much that simple story of the nativity scene really mattered in the construction of the modern world, because we still need to explore the most disturbing final consequences. So let's tie absolutely all of this together with the existential question that nobody really wants to answer honestly, but that's been screaming insistently in the back of our minds. If Jesus had never been born that night, what exactly would we be collectively celebrating in December today? And the brutally honest answer is genuinely disturbing. When you confront it, probably nothing significant, or perhaps something completely devoid of any real transcendent meaning. Maybe just an expanded version of the pagan Roman Saturnalia, where people drink until they literally pass out and exchange gifts out of mere rigid social obligation, without any layer of genuine sacrificial love behind the gesture. Or maybe not even that survives. Maybe December is just that horrible, depressing month that absolutely everyone suffers through in lonely silence, anxiously waiting for January to finally arrive, working normally in a mechanical routine, living automatically, without any powerful collective ritual that constantly reminds us that we are much more than simple biological machines of economic production and material consumption. And when you deliberately remove the profound meaning from a millennia-old celebration, you're not just removing the celebration itself, you're violently tearing away a substantial piece of the collective soul that kept people genuinely connected to something infinitely greater than themselves and their everyday problems. But there's a philosophical twist here that cuts much deeper than it superficially appears. Without the revolutionary story of the transcendent God who willingly chose to become a vulnerable human, the very fundamental idea that individual human life has intrinsic and sacred value becomes dramatically weaker and more contestable. Because, think about it honestly, in pure, raw nature, without comforting narratives, humans are not special in any way. We are merely slightly more intelligent primates brutally competing for scarce resources on a planet completely indifferent to suffering. It was specifically the Christian theology of Imago Dei, that we were created in the image and likeness of God, and that God so loved the world that he willingly became frail flesh to save us, that dramatically elevated humanity to a special and unique status in the cosmos. Without this hammered into the culture for millennia, what exactly prevents societies from treating human beings as completely disposable when convenient? What philosophically grounds universal human rights if there is nothing genuinely universal or transcendent about being human beyond similar DNA? You are left only with far more fragile and contingent philosophies attempting to justify human dignity solely on the basis of arbitrary social contracts or shifting pragmatic utility. And when these weak justifications inevitably fail, as they always do dramatically in times of crisis and scarcity, there is absolutely nothing stopping barbarism from returning in full force. And here's the final historical irony that closes the circle in a devastating way. Many people today celebrate Christmas in a completely secular and materialistic manner, without consciously thinking about Jesus even once, simply enjoying the expensive gifts, the abundant food, the family gatherings, the beautiful lights decorating the streets. And this is only possible because the Christian structure and narrative are still there, invisibly supporting everything, even if completely invisible to most. It's exactly like living in a tall, comfortable building, completely forgetting that it has a solid foundation. You only realize its critical importance when the foundation disappears and the entire building collapses catastrophically. In this alternative world without Jesus, there is no foundation from the beginning, so even the secular and commercialized version of Christmas doesn't exist, because there was never an original religious version to be gradually secularized over decades. It's empty from the start, and entire generations grow up without ever knowing that magical and inexplicable feeling of waking up specifically on December 25th, feeling that something special is in the air around you, even if you can't articulate exactly what it is. Without the story of the boy born in a manger, December is merely literal and metaphorical darkness with no promised light at the end of the tunnel. The cold is just cold without comforting meaning, and there is no promise that better days await just ahead. It is a much more cynical world, much more hopeless, much more devoid of transcendence and greater purpose. The truth that nobody wants to admit, but which becomes crystal clear when you seriously engage in this alternative history mental exercise: Christmas without Jesus is not only technically impossible, it's literally unthinkable philosophically. Because Christmas was never really about material gifts, decorative lights, decorated trees, or romantically falling snow. Those are just superficial decorations. Christmas is fundamentally about the radically revolutionary idea that on a cold, forgotten night, in a despised corner of the Roman Empire, something happened that would change absolutely everything forever. That genuine hope is born precisely in the most unlikely and humble places. That love is infinitely stronger than brute force. That light conquers darkness not through military might, but through courageous vulnerability. Remove this powerful idea from the center of the narrative, and Christmas completely collapses. But not only Christmas, a large part of Western civilization collapses along with it, because it was subtly sustained by this narrative from the beginning, even as people gradually forgot about it. So when someone asks you, "But isn't Christmas just commercial nowadays?" you might answer, yes, Christmas has been commercialized to the bone. It's become a capitalist consumption machine. It's lost much of its original meaning. But even this deformed and materialistic version only exists because 2,000 years ago, a story was told about a boy in a manger. And that story was so powerful, so transformative, so deeply rooted in the human psyche, that even when it was distorted, secularized, and commercialized to the point of exhaustion, it still manages to make people feel something special in December. The final question that closes everything: what would Christmas be without Jesus? The answer is simple and terrifying. It would be nothing, because there would be no Christmas, no special December, no light at the end of the year. Leave a comment. Did you realize how much this story literally impacted everything? And subscribe to the channel because we're going to continue exploring these historical moments that defined reality.